Okay. Some studies have shown that sugars, the important sugar ribose and deoxyribose, can be formed from formaldehyde and heat, and that that will form simple sugars, and ribose can be formed from two of those simple sugars. Volcanic heat liberates the phosphate, which is part of the backbone for DNA. If you look here, this is double-stranded DNA, and as you go down, you'll see these little silver things with four red things on them. The red ones are oxygen. The bluish one, or metallic one, is phosphate. So you have a ribose, phosphate, ribose, phosphate, ribose, phosphate as the backbone for DNA. So it's very important that we know that ribose can be formed very easily, and that the phosphate is accessible anywhere that there's hot rocks, essentially. So those black smokers would obviously liberate phosphate into their environment. Okay, two different tacks. I mentioned to you how DNA and RNA form proteins. I mentioned to you that there's messenger RNA, which is the RNA which duplicates the message on the information on the DNA. So we have messenger RNA. We have ribosomal RNA, where the messenger RNA goes to make proteins. We have transfer RNA, which is the ones which bring the amino acids to the ribosome to be connected up to form the proteins. That seems a little and the RNA in the ribosome acts as an enzyme. So RNA can not only contain information, that is the messenger RNA, but it can act as an enzyme on other materials. And it's believed the hypothesis that is most acceptable or makes the most sense now is that there was an RNA world that came before amino acids and proteins, because RNA seems to be able to do all the things that are necessary for selection to act on. That is, they have a genetic component as well as the enzymatic components. The oldest life forms that we've found are the archaebacteria, and the cyanobacteria, and they're the ones that are found in the black smokers. The earliest fossils that we have are older than mine. Let's see, where in 165. There are microscopic fossils of cyanobacteria as old as 3.5 billion years ago. They also have a different something from the fig tree group, 3.4 billion years ago. The cyanobacteria, which form the stromatolites, also 3.5 billion years ago. And one scientist has hypothesized that this is actually a planet of scum, because if you look at the timeline, you have blue-green algae, or cyanobacteria, which is there for billions of years, and then you have this little tiny segment of time, which is like 1 billion years, where you have other forms of life. So you've got 2.5 billion years where you got pond scum, and you got less than a billion years of other life. So if an alien came here randomly at some point in the Earth's development, they would have just looked and gone, yuck, and left.
Yeah.
Okay. You may have heard of the Cambrian explosion, the idea being that there weren't any complex life forms, and then suddenly, boom, the next day there were. Only problem is that the explosion took more than 1 million years. So the reason it's called an explosion is because geologists were thinking about it. And geologists think in millions and billions of years. And so 1 million years is a brief time to them. It's not a brief time to me. The first thing that formed was a prokaryote, which is basically just a cell membrane that happens to have some DNA and proteins in it. And I just got through showing you or describing how that could occur. The next thing that developed were eukaryotic cells. And they didn't come along for billions of years. But if you look inside them, they have things. They have a nucleus, they have Golgi apparatus, they have mitochondria, or if they're photosynthesizing, they have a chloroplast. And I found this out just this morning. Mitochondria not only have their own DNA, which we talked about some time back, but they have their own ribosomes. So they have their own DNA, they make their own messenger RNA, they have their own ribosomes. That pretty much tells me that at one point, mitochondria were separate, individual cells, and that this is a symbiotic relationship that's developed. And the same thing is true for chloroplasts. They have their own DNA, and they multiply inside a cell on their own schedule. Now, you may say, well, that's a good hypothesis that this is a symbiotic relationship, but you can't really prove it. Well, in his talk, he has wonderful examples of where there is still symbiosis going on. He shows a cell which has what looks like a flagellum, but it's not. It's a spirochete. It's a completely separate animal, so to speak, that's attached to the back end of this other big cell that will then help it move. It hasn't developed to a point where the DNA of the spirochete has, entered the cell and become part of the cell, and this is now just protein. It's a completely separate entity.
Like a polywog?
Yeah, sort of. It looks like, and the same thing is true for. He had another example. I think he said that the same thing was true for chloroplasts, that there is an example of a modern day living cell which has a symbiotic relationship with blue-green algae, or the cyanobacteria. And that pretty much is the frosting on the cake to me. I think the hypothesis that eukaryotes were formed from symbiosis from prokaryotes, I think that is worthy now of being called a theory, because there's so much evidence that confirms it. I should have put the timeline down here, but this is a huge amount of time. From here down to here is one. This is about 2.5 billion years, and from here to here is about 1 billion years. You have Phil. You brought that piece today. That's probably somewhere down here, which is on the order of 300 million years ago. Did they tell you? Do you know how old that piece is? Okay. Well, it's going to be somewhere below. It's going to be less than 350 million years ago, because the segmented worms didn't occur back this far. Okay. So this is 3.5 billion years ago, 1.8 billion years ago, 600 million years ago, 550 million years, and about 520 million years for those. So you can see that most of the time on Earth was just pond scum. I think that's hilarious. So we think that RNA came first. We think that things like clay or fool's gold or kitty litter were involved in being catalysts. I'll never look at kitty litter the same way again. I have it in my car, in wintertime to try and get out of, if I get stuck in the snow. Lost my thought.
Question.
Sure.
Where does clay come from?
Where does clay come from? Clay is, the clay that they're describing is a silicate. So it's a naturally forming material on the surface of the earth. If it's worn, if there's wear and tear enough, you get small enough particles to form those little clay particles. Because as I'm sure you've probably done at some point in your life, if you played with clay, if you add water to it, it just gets, it turns into like a split pea soup. There are tiny little particles that are suspended in the water. But it's a naturally forming silicate with silicon dioxide. But it also contains other minerals as well, like calcium and iron, for instance. So I think I am at the end.
I have trouble with the red writing at the top, which says Cambrian explosion, 1,000,000 years, and then underneath it, you have
Right.
all these things that took
Right.
millions of years.
Right. Well, the thing is, these things didn't fossilize much. So that the period of time that we're looking at is really here, where you had shells that would be visible as fossils. So it's from here to here. This is where you start getting complex forms. Things like segmented worms and so on are further down this way. So it's more a matter of starting here and going for millions of years. I should have said.
Well, if I wrote trillion
I
instead
should
of
have.
million, it
I
would
should
make
have.
sense to me.
I would have. Yeah, I should have written. Written.
I was trying to put
billion.
those time numbers
Yeah.
below into the million that was at the top. Maybe
Yeah.
they're not associated. I don't know.
They aren't. Not directly. Here, let me erase that. Get myself out of trouble here. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
During these time periods, which to us is just unthinkable.
Unimaginable.
Yeah. Would the product or element that you're studying have remained all through that period exactly as it was started out?
Well, if you remember, we still have sea urchins, but we also have sand dollars, and we have pretty good evidence that sand dollars evolved from sea urchins.
Oh.
But they split, and both of them had a niche that they could occupy, so both of them are alive today. But a lot of life forms split off and were okay for a while, and then their environment changed and they died. Went extinct. So it depends on whether or not you're lucky enough to stay alive.
There is a reality that has been repeated during many times, that the change was forced upon the changee by the fact that it had a necessity or
And the environmental change,
Yes.
climate change, environment change, change of parasites, change in geographic location, any of those changes can be a pressure for selection. I will stop.